So before we start, I think I should say that this game has a rather aggressive visual style that really can't be edited around, so flash warning for pretty much everything going on. Also, spoilers for the game if you care about that sort of thing. That said, we've talked about the works of Christoph Frey at length on the channel before. He has a very specific brand of slow burn horror. He's not really interested in building jump scare haunted houses for VTubers. Frey's games tend to be loaded with existential dread and personal trauma, games about not really being able to know others, and, often enough, not really being able to know yourself. He also has a tendency to play with rendering styles in ways that benefit the work. Horror Vacui uses its empty corridors and monochrome aesthetic to emphasize the unknowable gaps between memories, their connections having been shattered by trauma. And the space between made use of a lo-fi 3D style to enforce the ambiguity of its characters, exactly who is speaking and what their intents are. It was a game about barriers and not really being able to know others, and the art style helped reinforce this. And these trends continue with Frey's latest game, Letters to a Friend Episode 1, Farewell. In it, you play as a notary sent to the house of one Marcus Hall after the death of Hall's father. He wishes to renounce inheriting his father's house, and, as a notary, you have to go up there and get him to sign the paperwork. But along the way, you may find out more about Marcus, his house, and his father than you may have wanted to. The game borrows heavily from German expressionist silent films. The game emulates scratches and dust on the film stock. There's an intense vignetting around the edges of the screen. Everything's slightly out of focus, making details hard to parse, and the field of view is quite narrow. Shadows are harsh and flicker, emulating a camera that isn't quite precise in its exposure times, giving each frame a slightly different look than the last. And between the strobe-like effect of the flickering shadows and vignetting, as well as the narrow field of view, walking around from the perspective of a silent film camera can be off-putting, and not necessarily in the emotional way the game intends, but in more of a stomach-churning kind of way. Still, it's undeniably a unique aesthetic. I've never really seen silent films rendered with this level of fidelity in a game before. It's hard not to draw parallels between Letters to a Friend and, say, Nosferatu, a German expressionist silent film that is 100 years old this year. Nosferatu, a loose retelling of Bram Stoker's Dracula that tried to change the names and places but still got sued by Bram Stoker's wife, also involved a man sent to a mysterious house in the countryside to secure a real estate deal, ended up staying a few nights, and then got more than he bargained for as he learned about his host's true nature. But while Letters to a Friend Farewell emulates this aesthetic, it's also not quite right. While some amount of flicker and noise is present even in really pristine copies of German expressionist films, this is an exaggerated version of the look, almost closer to a black and white Zapruder film than the quality of film stock we see in good restorations. And the game itself still runs at about 60 FPS as you move around the environments, which is much smoother than the variable 15 or so frames per second choppily hand-crank cameras of long ago were capable of. And unlike the boxy aspect ratios of the German expressionist films, the game runs in widescreen. While some of this might just be concessions to technology, the result is a sense of disquieting anachronism. See also this modern car, or CRT TV and VHS tapes, or the fact that the house where this game takes place has massive power lines stretching overhead. This is not a game that takes place in the 1920s, it's a game that uses the aesthetics of 1920s German expressionist silent films, or at least an exaggerated, imagined version thereof, to convey a much more recent tale. And that's cool, but it's also interesting how that concept sort of clashes with Frey's general sensibilities, for good and for ill. Like, German expressionism, and expressionism more broadly, is all about capturing the subjective emotion of a thing. This often meant being non-literal, stretching the form of a subject to evoke a response. For example, take the backgrounds in the 1920 classic The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and how they portray a twisted and scary version of the town Dr. Caligari terrorized. They're 102 years old and are so cool that Rob Zombie basically just recreated entire shots from the film for his Living Dead Girl video. Or look at the futuristic cityscapes of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, the Blade Runner of its day, complete with laborers powering the city and the machinery of the underground. Nosferatu is a little more conservative on this front, but still has occasional shots like this, where the shadow of Nosferatu ascends a staircase in pursuit of his prey, or this scene which shows just how small and isolated Hutter is in Count Orlok's castle. Even this beachfront from Nosferatu is just... That's a From Software game's beachfront. I've been there in Elden Ring. And it's interesting because Christoph Frey's works are no stranger to symbolism and abstraction, but he also doesn't typically go for the emotional bigness that one typically associates with Expressionism. Even if they are allegorical or deeply symbolic, and even if they're rendered in monochrome or lo-fi PS1 styles, his worlds exist in a very straightforward manner. The house is a house, the car is a car. The biggest aesthetic swing here are the power lines which crisscross the landscape and stand as giant crucifixes in the background throughout the whole game. But remove the silent film filter, and most of Letters to a Friend Farewell wouldn't look unlike Gone Home. The spaces themselves aren't designed to evoke an emotion so much as the rendering style of the spaces, and I find that an interesting contrast with some of the films that inspired the game. And, because I like retelling Frey's games and picking apart their themes, let's walk through it. Again, spoilers for those interested. It's only a half an hour to 45 minutes long, so if this seems cool, maybe play it and then come back. Anyways, the game opens with a driving montage as you, the unnamed protagonist notary, recounts the events of the game to an acquaintance via a letter. You say that maybe there are no farewells, and begin to tell your tale. You arrive at the Hall residence late in the afternoon, and Marcus invites the player in. You exchange awkward pleasantries, and while you mostly just want to have Marcus sign the paper so that you can leave, you are curious about why he's renouncing the home. Before you can get to that, though, an indistinct sound is heard elsewhere in the house. But crucially, not by the player, because this is still a silent film. Marcus gets up to go deal with it, and the player is left alone with their thoughts for a few moments. I love this bit because the first time I played it, I actually got jump scared by Marcus coming back. Like I said, the game is silent, and if you're lost in thought while looking out the window or at your coffee, you might not know he's returned until you turn and Regardless, he asks if you'd like to tour the house before anything is signed. And looking around, it's mostly a standard house. The basement is dark, but there's not really anything in there except a suspicious number of gas cans and the chairs from the space between making a cameo. There's what appears to be a Virgin Mary statue in the corner of the living room that looks creepy, but that's mostly just due to the rendering style. You find that the attic is locked, so you can't really snoop around up there. Really, the only thing of note is the study with a bunch of creepy, photorealistic paintings of a door and what looks like maybe a dead body and something else. You return to Marcus, and realizing it's too late for you to drive back and tired from the journey out there, he offers you the opportunity to spend the night in the study, and you begrudgingly agree. That night, the protagonist is awoken by a noise, and because it's a silent film game, not a noise the player can hear. After exploring the house to find where this damn noise that you can't even hear is coming from, you approach the attic, and as you reach for the handle, for the first time we have audio other than pops and scratches, and as tense notes begin to play, Marcus stops you from opening the door. He says that it's still locked, and while he doesn't have the key, he'll find it tomorrow. And also tomorrow, he's going to show you something. You go back to bed, making sure to lock the door behind you, and try to sleep. The next day, Marcus takes you to a lake. You have no idea what's up, but you follow him down a trail and into what looks like a bunker or drainage point. When you enter, the game flashes an image on the screen, one of the pictures from the study. Marcus had painted this? He leads you down some stairs, through some sewage drainage, and into what feel like catacombs, and finally into a room where there's an altar? Sarcophagus? Monolith? Whatever it is, it's the other photo. He acts in awe of it, calls it beautiful, says he's never seen it before, and simply watches it intently and unblinking from afar. After a while, the two of you leave, and sitting on a bench by the lake, Marcus rambles about how its appearance makes him feel like a kid. He then talked about how his dad always took care of him, and even after he got sick, he wanted to take care of Marcus. He just didn't stop. And then Marcus seemed to realize he'd made a mistake. He apologizes for bringing you out there, and takes you back to the house in silence. You break for a cigarette in the yard while he heads to bed, but standing in the open, in the dark, you slowly feel eyes on you. You also notice a weird, sweet smell. Swearing you'll get him to sign the testament tomorrow, you head to bed, the smell seeming even more pungent in the house, and fall asleep. and awaken again with a terrible sense of fear. You don't know what it is, but you're compelled to go into that attic, the only part of the house you haven't seen yet. You open the door and get overwhelmed by the smell, but bring your hand to your mouth and move on. At this point, you're desperate for an answer. And there in the flickering darkness, you see it. A bed, and on that bed, a shirtless man posed in the same way as the painting of the body in the study. You have to go now. He must not see you. He must not get up. Go now. The notary runs back down to the study and locks the door in fear, only emerging once they've heard Marcus's car pull away sometime later. When you do come out, you check the bed in the attic, only to find it empty. But you knew where they were going. And so through the pouring rain, you rush back to the lake, and enter the drainage system flooded with runoff from the storm, and work your way down to find Joseph Hall's body, burning. By the time the cops arrive, they find Joseph's body washed downstream miles away. You return to the Hall estate and find the testament signed by Marcus, who was last seen at a train station leaving town. You take one last look at the house and drive away. In your letter, you suggest that maybe there are farewells after all, or that you'd like to think so. For Marcus's sake, anyway. Like all of Frey's work, it's highly abstract and largely open for interpretation. Did Marcus simply have trouble letting go of his father when he died? Did he refuse to recognize the loss by hiding the body away in the attic? That would explain the smell, and the fact that Marcus referred to his father as if he were alive at the end. And the burning of the body may have been Marcus finally coming to terms with the scenario, his final farewell. But then why renounce the house? And what is the significance of the altar? And why warn you, with terror in his eyes, that his father must not know you're there? Given the obvious references to Nosferatu, it's tempting to think that there may be a supernatural element at play, that maybe the altar brought Marcus's dad back to life in some way. After all, Marcus did make the paintings of the altar before he claimed to have seen it, giving it a bit of a supernatural vibe. He was drawn to it, transfixed by it. And his purportedly dead dad is very much spoken about as if he's alive by Marcus at the end. Could there have been some terrible unnatural force that led Marcus to hide his undead father in the attic after an incident with the altar? It would explain the noises in the house throughout the game, as well as the desire to renounce the house with its cursed land. And that rot smell could still be undead rot. Did he burn his father to death to destroy the monster he had hidden away when the notary discovered the awful truth? Or was Marcus Hall simply a skittish guy that felt smothered by his elderly dad who wouldn't stop trying to control his adult son's life? Did he try to off his dad? Poison, perhaps, could explain the sweet smell and the not-quite-deceased state of his father. And then, upon realizing the slow approach to murder had been found out by this nosy notary, he scared the player into hiding and burned his sickly dad to death on the altar that represented his suffocating care. But in that case, why the wild expression in his eyes when warning you, the notary, that his dad must not know you were there that night? Why is the loose end the guy who's almost dead, and not you, the surviving witness to his crimes? Letters to a Friend Farewell doesn't answer any of that, and is more than happy to leave the game in a state of some mystery. Even thematically, it's more unfocused than, say, The Space Between. While there are ideas here of a fraught father-son relationship, of what it means to inherit property from someone you had a complicated history with, of difficulty moving on from loss and saying farewell, none of them are really explored to any real degree. Honestly, instead of any of that, this game is more of a vibe, of staying at an unfamiliar and uncomfortable house full of weird objects and smells, of being forced to be with someone who seems nice but is a little off and makes you feel deeply uncomfortable. It's Nosferatu meets Creep, I guess, which, now that I say that out loud, sounds pretty sweet. Regardless, it's less interested in its themes than in its tone, and that's okay. It is, after all, just the first episode in what is a planned anthology, and I'm curious to see where it goes next, whether the stories intertwine or are a true anthology of different characters. Either way, if you were put off by the Space Between's pacing, I think this is certainly more approachably paced. While it's still a silent game that's a slow burn, it doesn't linger on lines of dialogue the way the Space Between does, and between that and being about 20 minutes shorter, it feels like it moves at a much faster clip. And if you're trepidatious about trying this game out, Frey actually began the Letters to a Friend anthology with a prototype during the 2015 Asylum Game Jam. This version is a lot more of a straightforward horror game with an actual monster than the slow burn existential dread stuff that has come to be Frey's signature style, but it's a wonderfully tense little 5-minute slice of gaming using the same aesthetic sense. If anything, it plays with light and shadow even more. And while Letters to a Friend Farewell is $6 on itch.io, this is pay what you want. But yeah, that's a German expressionist silent film horror title for those horror fans sick of jump scares and looking for something new. I'm pretty sure you haven't played anything quite like this. Check it out.